BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill with the Farming Today podcast. This time, the NFU is concerned a trade deal with the Gulf states could open the door for low-welfare meat imports from around the world.
We cannot undermine ourselves in any trade negotiation because everybody is watching on. And if anybody feels that our poultry sector is open to be targeted in future trade negotiations, we'll have the US coming back to the table saying, well, look, you've done it for the Gulf. We now want a piece of that.
We'll have more on that a little later. First, though, all week we're exploring seaweed, how it can be used in farming and how it can be farmed. There's evidence that humans have been using seaweed as a fertiliser for thousands of years. When chemical fertilisers were developed a century ago, that use of seaweed largely died out. But for some, it's making a comeback. Bob Hockenhull has been to a farm on the Shropshire-Herefordshire border where seaweed plays a dominant role in the business.
In a shed on a farm at Little Hereford near Ludlow, crates of seaweed sourced from the Scottish Hebrides are being stored. Farmer David Edwards has lived here all his life.
We started with seaweed back in the 60s, actually. It was just something that we had the opportunity to use and looked at it as a change to the fertilisers that we had been doing. We also like to use natural products if we could on the farm.
The farm is a small one, 70 acres. Over the years, to keep afloat, dealing in seaweed has become the dominant business.
I started as a diversification in farming to look at selling seaweed to other farms and pushing the message out there. Yeah, it's just grown and grown and grown. So, it's a very efficient way of producing crops naturally and sustainably because it's all renewable products that we're using. There's no sort of chemicals travelling across the world and it keeps the carbon footprint of everything down.
And the seaweed itself, you've talked about some of the benefits, but it can compete then with artificial fertilisers using nitrogen.
Yeah, absolutely. But not necessarily just seaweed on its own. What we do is a special blend. We're blending seaweed and humics, but we're also adding nitrogen fixing and phosphate cycling bacteria as well. And the key of those three things together makes the big difference of being able to get it to work with a similar efficiency to chemical fertilisers.
As the seaweed business has grown, with hundreds of customers all over the UK, the Edwardses have invested in a Keenan mixer to blend the seaweed and the other ingredients.
The machines worked very, very well for what we've wanted to do. We're getting a very consistent product and we're mixing 10,000 litres at a go as a batch now. We could add other minerals in if we wanted to. We can mix what we need to in a timely fashion and it's cut our labour cost hugely.
Michael Edwards, David's son, takes me to a field of recently planted wheat on the farm where the seaweed mix has been used as a fertiliser.
I've actually been and dug some wheat here. It's looking nice and healthy. The seaweed will help it fight against fungal disease. We're looking at the root. It's got a nice, deep, healthy root. And we break the soil apart. We can see lots of fungi in and around the roots of it, and there's a high bacterial count in the soil so that the plant is naturally taking a lot more nutrition out of the soil.
Do you think that seaweed is going to become more and more prevalent on farms in the UK?
More natural products are going to become more prevalent. We're seeing now with reduction in chemical fertilisers, we're not saying we can go away from it completely, but as we've been going down the journey for the past especially 10 years, we can start and reduce that chemical load. We're certainly seeing a huge improvement in our soils, their ability to withstand high rainfall or high droughts, and it's about trying to keep a consistent crop that's economic to produce.
Farmer David Edwards there with Bob Hockenhull. More details have emerged about the future of farm payments in England after last week's spending review. Since Brexit, the annual payments farmers receive from the government have been in transition. Under the old EU rules, farmers receive payments based on the amount of land they had. But that system is being phased out and will end by 2028. Farmers always knew their payments would be reduced, but not how quickly that would happen. They now know that next year the most anyone will get will be £600. Our producer Heather Simons has been looking into it. So Heather, what's the context to this announcement?
Well, we're talking here about the old EU-style subsidy payments, based, as you say, on the amount of land people have. Farmers in England have known since 2020 that their area-based payments would be phased out over time and would be gone entirely by 2028. People with more land, who got more money, would see their payments decrease faster than those who received less in the first place. The idea was to reduce the amount spent on these old payments so that the money could instead be spent on the new system of environmental payments being introduced in England post-Brexit. That's the Environmental Land Management Schemes, or as regular listeners will know them, ELMS. The initial plan only gave precise details of how much the area-based payments would be reduced by each year up until 2024, but it was a fairly gradual reduction over that time. Then in last year's budget, we got more details about this year's rates with a much steeper drop in payments for those who earned more to start with a total cap of £7,200, no matter how much land you have. And now DEFRA has released the plan for 2026, which again is a pretty dramatic drop with a cap of £600.
So how much money are we talking about?
Well, as I say, it depends on the size of the farm. So I'll give you two examples to get an idea of it. If we start with someone with a 1,000-acre farm, they would have received about £94,000 in 2020. By last year, that would have dropped to about £55,000, so a significant decrease of £40,000 over 4 years. But then this year, suddenly it goes down to £7,200, and next year, £600. For someone with just 100 acres, they would have received £9,500 in 2020. By last year, that would have been £4,700. This year, they'll get nearly £2,300, and next year, they'll get £189. In DEFRA's online blog, it says it's ending the era of payouts to large and wealthy landowners for simply owning land. It goes on, these payments are based on past subsidies and do not provide value for money or support the environment. And it says this reduction in payments will enable it to invest more in environmental schemes that will make a significant contribution to our Environment Act targets.
And what do people make of this?
Well, first, why don't we hear from a farmer? I've been speaking to Richard Heddy, who farms 1,000 acres in Buckinghamshire with his family.
You know, when you talk of phasing something out, you think you can ease something away. You don't just remove over 90% of it straight away. So, yeah, it's staggering. And, you know, the amount of money's gone from something we can plan around and help us run a business to an amount that it's useful, we can use it, but you can't really make any business decisions around it.
What would £600 get you?
It's about 7 rolls of silage wrap, the black plastic we put around our bales. So it will do a couple of 100 bales of silage. Stuff's so expensive in agriculture. We've all seen the inflation. Parts for machinery are through the roof. I could get a metal pin that might go in the boom of a telehandler for £600.
The CLA, the Country Land and Business Association, has called this expected but nonetheless unwelcome, and points out that this comes at a time of uncertainty for farmers because the sustainable farming incentive, that's part of the new environmental payment system I mentioned earlier, remains closed to new applications, and we don't yet know when the new scheme will open and what it will be like. Of course, you could argue till the cows come home about whether it was right that farmers ever got area-based payments in the first place, but the fact is that they have done for decades. So as Richard Heddy explains, businesses have planned with them in place.
When you're producing grain at about the cost of production, you've got to see a margin somewhere to take care of all the other costs that are concerned with the business. So it was just being absorbed by the business in the day-to-day running so that the farm could stay afloat. And without that, you know, we're trying to diversify, we're trying to find other ways of keeping the farm going when the years are rough, like, you know, grain prices this year are terrible. But it's a struggle, you know. I'm a farmer. I'm not someone who's good at dealing with the public and opening up farm shops or running Airbnbs or whatever. My passion is growing food, and that's where my skill base lies. And that's what I'd really like to continue doing.
Finally, it's worth noting that agriculture is devolved and area-based payments have only been phased out in England. In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, new schemes are still being developed, but they're all likely to retain some element of land-based payment.
Thank you very much, Heather. The NFU has confirmed it sent a private letter to the Prime Minister raising concerns over a prospective trade deal with the Gulf states. It said the deal could open up the UK to imports of low-welfare meat from the Gulf and, more importantly, many other countries around the world. Although meat from the Gulf states might come up to UK hygiene standards, some welfare groups are concerned about the conditions animals are kept in and the intensive nature of production, especially poultry. Tom Bradshaw is the NFU president.
We're hearing very worrying rumours that poultry might be part of the deal with the GCC, and we really can't square that. Our standards of production are something we're very proud of, and their standards over there are pretty well non-existent in comparison to the standards we have to produce to.
Do you actually know that? What are the poultry production methods in the Gulf states?
Well, I think that is the challenge, actually, Anna, is that it's very difficult to understand that they have those production standards that we have. And without those core standards of imports that we've been asking for, so that imports have to meet our standards of production, it would be very difficult to understand exactly what those Gulf standards of production are. And look, we've stood really firm with the US, and we can't give other trading countries a belief that if they push hard enough, then there's going to be an opportunity to open up the market. So this isn't just about the Gulf Cooperation Agreement. It's about what signals it sends to other trading partners around the world. And we really value the work that the government have done to date, and they can't undermine it within these negotiations.
But then the DEFRA Secretary of State Steve Reed told the NFU conference just this year that the government, and I'll quote him, will never lower our food standards in trade agreements and will protect our most sensitive sectors. So aren't you reassured by that?
We have been reassured with the words that Steve has said and with the work that's been done to date. But we know that across government there are differing views on some of this. And what we can't do is take any of this for granted. And I think we are sufficiently worried at the moment around the negotiating position that we decided we would take the unique opportunity to write to the Prime Minister. This isn't something that we do routinely, but we are very spooked at the moment about the conversations that we're having, and we want his commitment that they will withhold those standards, as they have done so far.
In the past, the NFU has been quite positive about a trade deal with the Gulf states. Back in 2022, the NFU said the deal looks overwhelmingly positive for UK exporters. So there are two sides to this, aren't there?
Absolutely. I mean, generally, it's a deal that we would be very optimistic about. The opportunities that exist, they import a significant proportion, over 3/4 of the food that they eat there in the GCC is imported. So there's real opportunities there. We've already got a strong cheese export market. But if we could reduce the dairy tariffs, then there's opportunities for our wider dairy industry. There's opportunities for our sheep sector and lamb exports, particularly, again, if we could remove those tariffs on frozen sheep meat, which at the moment stand at 5%. So there are sectors where there's opportunities, but that doesn't mean that we can afford to risking importing poultry from the desert at a time where we've been so careful to uphold our standards of production within the other trade negotiations. We can't drop our guard at this moment in time.
How much chicken would the UK realistically import from the Gulf states, though?
I think that this is more about the principle it sets to other trade negotiations in the future. We cannot undermine ourselves in any trade negotiation because everybody is watching on. And if anybody feels that our poultry sector is open to be targeted in future trade negotiations, not just the GCC, but we'll have the US coming back to the table saying, well, look, you've done it for the Gulf. We now want a piece of that. We'll have Brazil, and so we've got to be really careful at the signal this sends out to other countries around the world about whether our poultry sector is in scope or not.
NFU President Tom Bradshaw. The government told us in a statement, we will only ever sign trade agreements which align with the UK's national interests, and we will not lower our high food standards, including on animal welfare. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Heather Simons. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.